This video is going to go over examples of contemporary vertical sonorities and contemporary rhythmic concepts, okay? So this will help you for some homework coming up. I'm basically just going to describe each one and show you an example of each, and hopefully you can just use this informational video to fill out your homework that coincides with this, okay? So this is basically just running through definitions that we're going to be doing and what things will look like, okay? So what we're going to start with is what we call polychords. A polychord is when you literally have two chords going on at the same time. So let's say that you were given this as maybe piano music or something. So this is an example of a polychord. So this means that we have multiple polychords, right? So this is an E flat major chord on top of a D minor chord. So that's actually how you would label it above this, or below it, is just E flat major over D minor, okay? So that's a polychord. It's very simple as long as you can recognize that this is a chord and this is a chord. Obviously, this can also show up in an inversion. So you might see it like G, B flat, and an E on top. That's still counted as a polychord. If you wanted to, you could do an E flat 6 over a D minor chord. So they do appear in inversions, but obviously if you tried to stack D, F, A to G, B, E flat, you can't really just create a large chord to describe that. Also, a special form of polychords are called split third chords. And what happens there is that it shares the same root, but then it is representing both major and minor qualities of that. So for example, if we had a D minor down here, that's D minor, and then instead we had a D major up top, okay? So this is split third, and that is, again, built on the same root, but representing both major and minor qualities. So this is a special kind of polychord. Great. Next, we're going to talk about quartal and secundal harmonies. Quartal and quintal, I guess. So a quartal harmony is a sonority, which I know we've been using that term. A sonority, again, is just a collection of notes that we can't exactly call a chord. So a quartal harmony is just from stacking fourths. So quartal, quart, four, right? So for example, it could be a C, stacked a fourth above it is an F, stacked above that is a B, stacked above that is a E, stacked above that is an A, right? So these are quartal harmonies, quartal, and that is stacked fourths. So obviously we can't label that as a chord, so that's why we call it a sonority. It is not a chord, but it is an entity, right? So the same thing happens for quintal harmonies, which are stacked fifths, right? So again, we would have C, G, D, A, E, right? So these are all stacked fifths, so that is quintal. Quintal harmonies are stacked fifths. If you were trying to puzzle this out, obviously there is no way that we can shrink this and make it into stacked thirds to label it as a chord. So those are quartal and quintal. If you can stack them in fourths, you're good. If you can stack them in fifths, you're good, and you can label them. Next, we're going to talk about secundal harmonies. Secundal harmonies is referred to a sonority derived from seconds, which kind of makes sense. Secundal, it makes sense with quartal, quintal, secundal, right? So that means that if you were able to stack them in seconds, that would be like a C to a D to an E. Obviously this looks more like a cluster, so usually how I would view it and find it, so if you have like an E, and then let's say you have an F over here, and then let's say that you have a G sharp here, and then an A, even if you have an A here, maybe a B up here, you're able to boil this all down into one octave and just see that it's all seconds, right? So that would make sense. Or also you might just see a lot of just seconds stacked next to each other, maybe just that, E to F sharp or E to F. You might see that, and those are secundal harmonies. And those are, again, stacked seconds. Okay, so moving on from secundal harmonies, we do end up getting what we call cluster or tone clusters. And that's when you have 3 or more adjacent pitches in secundal relationships. So 3 or more, so that would be like E, F, G is one. This is a tone cluster. And then if we have 4 or 5 even, this is a very big tone cluster, okay? So again, that is 3 or more secundal relationships, I guess, stacked all together. So this needs to be like a big cluster. It makes sense, it's a cluster, right? Which is different than stacking seconds when they're spread out, like what we were doing, the G, and then let's say we have an F there. This is secundal harmonies, but it's not a cluster, right? Because it's actually spread out. The clusters start when they're literally just clustered together. So basically a tone cluster is a special kind of secundal harmony, okay? Another thing that you can find is what we call whole tone chords, and those again are related to the secundal harmonies. That means that they are chords built from the whole tone scale. So a whole tone scale again is all just whole tones, so like C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, right, and then back to C. Right, so this would be it's kind of like a tone cluster, but it's specified of the distance between each of the secundal elements within that. So I know it's kind of hard to remember, but there is secundal harmonies that are just built on stacked seconds. There are tone clusters that are literally the secundal harmonies together into a cluster. And then there is whole tone chords, which are built from whole tones, which again is used as secundal harmonies, right? So if you could find an example of maybe something that has D, F sharp, A sharp, and then you also have like an E, this is all belongs to a whole tone scale, right? It's a whole tone chord, so it's all part of that. So obviously those are built on seconds, also kind of technically secundal harmonies. There is also a simpler thing that does happen a lot, and that is simply just called an added note chord. So basically what you do in this situation, let's say that you see something like this. E, let's do a G and a C. So let's say that you have something that looks like C major here, obviously C major first inversion, but then for some reason you're also thrown in with an A, okay? Or actually, let's say an F. F might be even better. Okay, so let's say that an F is added into that. Obviously, it's going to be really hard to stack this. So if you were to boil it down, you get C, E, G, and then you have an F there. So this is called an added note chord. If you just eliminate that F from your head and you have a C major, this is a C major add F chord. So usually there's just no way to exactly get rid of, again, it's kind of related to those secundal harmonies. I wouldn't call this a tone cluster because it's not completely, not all 4 of the notes are clustered together. Instead, I would try and find that bass chord and then find that one note that does not fit. So that is an added note chord. It's exactly what it sounds like, a chord with an added note. Great. So that should be all information that you need for all of the vertical sonorities. I went through all the definitions. On Canvas as well, under the reference sheets, there should be a... So that should be it for your contemporary vertical sonorities. This should help you for your homework. I want to do a very short little section on rhythmic concepts to help you with your rhythm worksheet. So there is a reference sheet that gives you a bunch of definitions of rhythms and contemporary rhythmic uses and everything, but the homework assignment that I am giving you does talk about a couple of things. So number one, I want to go over non-retrogradable Now that is a very long word. Non-retrogradable rhythms. Now, retrogradable means that you can take something and then you write it backwards, right? Non-retrogradable means that if you write it backwards, it's going to be the same thing. So it's the same idea as a palindrome in like the English language. So like the word noon. If you write it backwards, you're going to get noon again, right? So that's non-retrogradable, because retrogradable means that you're looking for something that's different. So in that case, whenever we're looking at a rhythm, we look at something that looks like this. This is actually non-retrogradable, because if I were to write it in reverse, I get quarter note, eighth, eighth, quarter, right? So this is a non-retrogradable rhythm because it's the same forward as backwards. If we have a retrogradable rhythm, let's say that this is actually like this, and I write it backwards, we get a different rhythm. So that means that this is retrogradable. So basically, all that you have to remember is that non-retrogradable means that it is a palindrome, the same in the English language, same forward as backwards. All right? There's also a concept called added value. Added value means that within a rhythm, something has been added, okay? So basically what you would be given is, let's say that you were given a basic rhythm pattern, 2/8 notes, quarter, quarter, let's do that. This does happen to be non-retrogradable as well, okay? So let's say you're given this, and then instead you were given something that looks like this. So it's basically the same rhythm, but this little 16th note has been added, right? So I'd put a little plus there and say that that's added value, but it basically boils down to the same rhythm, right? So that means an added value just means that they take a rhythm, a basic rhythm, and then maybe you hear this first in a piece, and then you hear this the second time. It sounds a little bit different, but it's basically the same. So basically we're just sneaking in a little added value. All right. And that should be it. Those are the last two definitions that are not on the worksheet, or sorry, not on the reference sheet that you will need to complete that homework. Great. So this has been contemporary harmonic vertical concepts, and then a couple of rhythms at the end there just to help you with what is going on. Awesome.